Okay, let's do this. You've put a fascinating source in front of us for this deep dive. One that really challenges the way many of us think about modern history.
Hmm.
It's just a single source, but it definitely packs a punch with a very specific, I'd say provocative argument.
That's right. This source is particularly focused on questioning that standard timeline of innovation, specifically how quickly things seem to, pop up in the late 18th and 19th centuries.
Right, and our mission here is simple but, well, crucial. We're going to unpack exactly what this source claims, understand the perspective it's coming from,
Yeah,
and pull out the key details and connections it highlights to make its case.
absolutely. And it's vital to remember we are strictly exploring the source's argument. We're not here to say if its claims are right or wrong,
No, not at all.
or to bring in other information. We're just diving into the content you provided and showing you how this source builds its viewpoint.
Sounds like a plan. And right from the jump, this source really throws down the gauntlet. It immediately takes aim at what it calls the mainstream narrative.
It does. The core idea here is that many buildings we're told were built in the 1800s. Well, the source says they actually existed long before that.
Okay.
It argues that people had sophisticated knowledge, sophisticated capabilities for potentially thousands of years, completely contrary to the idea that our amazing society, with all its advancements, suddenly just, appeared.
It uses some pretty strong language, too, doesn't it, about the conventional timeline, calling it lying or, what was it, false or extremely altered.
Yes, exactly. The source's perspective is that the standard timeline suggests these huge stretches of history where seemingly nothing much happened.
Right.
And then, boom, a sudden explosion of progress over a really short period, roughly beginning when the USA was established.
And that's the pivot point, isn't it? The source immediately zeroes in on the early days of the USA, banks, and these incredible structures it keeps mentioning.
Precisely. A key point the source raises is that many of these structures, which it describes as incredible ancient buildings, were, according to the source, simply taken over, repurposed by banks or the newly formed USA.
And it makes a specific connection there. The USA and banks were created, and then, quote, right after that, we get all these brand new inventions.
Right. The source sees the buildings themselves as evidence of prior advanced technology, beyond just how to build things.
Okay.
And for this source, the appearance of groundbreaking inventions immediately following the formation of the USA and these financial institutions, well, it's highly suspicious, especially if you believe the timeline is something that was planned.
Okay, here's where the source really lays out its case, walking us through what it sees as an impossibly rapid string of firsts in the official timeline.
Right. It starts with a timestamp. The USA formed in 1776.
You got it.
And then it immediately points out that just 16 years later, the stock market is created.
16 years. Okay.
The source explicitly questions the odds of that specific timing, and it links it back to both the USA and the stock market somehow ending up with these great buildings. It even shows photos of what it calls absolutely incredible architecture and claims this specific building was just found, claimed, and repurposed. That's a core piece of its visual argument, it seems.
Okay, so USA, stock market. What's next in the source's rapid-fire sequence?
According to the source, the first train appears around this time.
A train, okay.
Right.
Followed closely by.
The bike. And the source makes a point of highlighting that the bike's origin story often involves a servant, the Duke of Germany.
Right, I saw that.
The source's reaction is pretty blunt. It compares it to stories of, prisoners building Capitol buildings and just calls it, what a joke.
So it's using that detail to cast doubt on the official stories for these big inventions.
Seems like it, yeah, to cast doubt on their credibility.
Yeah.
So from the source's perspective, you've got nothing for millennia, and then in roughly 20 years, bang, USA, stock market, first train, bike.
Wow. Okay. And the source claims there's a bit of a pause then, a long wait until 1863.
Yes, and according to the source, 1863 is significant because that's when soccer was supposedly created.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the source's take is quite sarcastic. It says, they had no games before this. Nobody played any games. No fun. Finally, we have some fun in 1863.
So from its perspective, even leisure and entertainment are part of this sudden appearance.
Exactly. It links the appearance of games to the introduction of things like the first phone in 1876.
A phone, okay.
Saying, you can see we're getting some fun, we're getting some toys, we're introducing it to the community once again. It implies these things are being reintroduced.
Reintroduced. Interesting phrasing. And in the very same year, 1876, Major League Baseball is created.
Yep, same year. The source notes this with, "So now we have 2 games, now things are getting fun."
Huh.
And it specifically points out how mainstream accounts seem to struggle to pinpoint baseball's origins, mentioning possibilities like tuckball, stoolball, Flanders, rounders.
Right, that history is a bit murky.
The source finds this lack of clear origin particularly telling. It even calls a 2005 book trying to trace baseball's history embarrassing because, in its view, it highlights this confusion. It sees it as proof the official story doesn't hold up.
So the source's summary of this period is basically trains, bikes, phones, games, all start being used within just a few years, go figure, it says.
Yeah, it constantly circles back to that central question. Nothing happens for thousands of years, but as soon as the USA opens up, everything starts happening. What are the odds? That's the core puzzle for this source.
And the pace doesn't slow down from there, according to the source.
Not at all. In 1878, the first light bulb appears. The source comments on how many brilliant people must have been around simultaneously during this short window.
It also throws some shade on the famous story of Thomas Edison and the kite, right?
Yeah, suggesting they wish they wrote a better story for how electricity was supposedly harnessed. It implies the real story is less dramatic, or maybe less sudden than the narrative we get.
And the next development, the source finds that particularly hard to swallow.
It does. Only 8 years after the light bulb, the first car appears.
8 years?
The source's reaction is strong. It just states, "No way. If you believe this narrative, this is bullshit."
That jump just seems unbelievable to the source, based purely on the timeline itself.
Right. It sees that rapid progression as defying, well, logical development. And it keeps going. Shortly after the car, the first power tool.
Power tool, okay.
The source notes the sudden leap from manual labor. No more chisels. Just incredible what happened in the last few years.
It really emphasizes that contrast, doesn't it, with the centuries before?
It does. The source asks rhetorically, what were people doing in the 1400s or 2,000 years ago without lights or tools? Suggesting, with sarcasm, they must have been hiding in a cave if you take the mainstream narrative at face value.
Okay, so we've got ground transport, tools.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, the rapid pace isn't confined to the ground. 8 years after the power tool, according to the source, the first plane takes flight. 1903, Wright brothers.
Right.
The source's summary is just, let's just start flying these things around. Like it was decided.
It even recounts those specific, almost hard-to-believe details of the supposed first flight.
Yeah, 852 feet on the 4th try, damaged on landing, then a powerful gust of wind blew it over and wrecked it.
At the source's comment.
Couldn't write that any better. Implying the story sounds too convenient, maybe fabricated.
Moving into the 20th century, then.
The source points to the creation of the NFL in 1920, stating, tons of games, tons of we are just the best. It's tying the development of major professional sports leagues into this same pattern of sudden emergence.
So the source's consistent point is this pattern of rapid, almost back-to-back creation.
Exactly. You'd think that all of this would be created over a long period of time. It just comes right after the next one, right after the next one. That's the quote.
And by 1927, the source notes the sheer variety of tech supposedly developed so quickly.
Cars, planes, trains, TVs, phones. And it stresses that the USA, the government, the stock market came before all this. But crucially, not way before all of it, just right before. The timing, again, is key to the source's argument, that tight proximity.
Okay, the timeline keeps marching on in the source's presentation. 1936.
First computer, the source's reaction.
Yeah.
So now we have TVs, computers, and what's next? Kind of rhetorically.
And what is next, according to the source?
What's next, in this source's view, is the NBA, starting in 1946.
Basketball.
And just like the baseball origin story, the source finds this standard narrative of its beginning and future. The peach basket and a soccer ball, it calls that the most ridiculous story of all time.
It seems the source is particularly skeptical of these really simple origin stories for what became massive, complex industries.
Definitely. It mocks the idea of multi-billion-dollar enterprises, starting from such humble, almost accidental beginnings. It sees it as more evidence of, fabricated narratives covering something up.
And finally, the source wraps up its timeline examples with
the creation of the internet in 1983, adding just incredible. This brings its rapid timeline of modern development right up near the end of the 20th century.
Which leads us straight to the source's conclusion, and it's a very direct challenge, isn't it, to anyone who accepts the conventional timeline.
Oh, yeah. The source summarizes this whole period it just detailed as so short, yet you've got everything you need and you had nothing before this.
And the central, really pointed question it leaves you with is, how do you go from nothing to everything? It doesn't make sense.
The source's conviction here is, well, it's crystal clear. It states that if you genuinely believe the conventional timeline that just outlined, there's nothing I can do. This is proof, in my opinion, they had all this stuff.
They had all this stuff. Okay, it introduces this idea that they, some unspecified group,
Right.
unspecified, know how to run a society from scratch. They implant it right into our society after a few years.
No.
So the source seems to imply this rapid development isn't really innovation, but more like the reintroduction or implantation of existing knowledge by some controlling group.
Exactly. And to emphasize how unbelievable it finds the mainstream narrative, the source uses that legal analogy.
Right, the court one.
If this timeline was in court, the judge would laugh and tell them that this narrative is absolutely ridiculous.
It makes it very clear this isn't just some academic quibble over dates for the source.
Not at all. It explicitly states this is not just about history. This is much deeper and much more important.
And to back this up, the source promises more examples, specific building examples.
Yes, it mentions buildings it believes support its view, like an Egyptian building in Richmond, Virginia, noting the city was founded in 1845, also the Beagle County Courthouse in Indiana, and the main cathedral of the Russian Armed Forces. These specific examples seem intended to visually challenge the mainstream architectural and historical timelines, provide concrete counter-evidence in its view.
Okay, so to kind of bring it all together, this source's central argument is that the standard timeline, the one showing this explosion of innovation after the late 1700s, well, it's deeply suspect.
Yeah, highly suspect.
It sees this rapid pace combined with the appearance of these sophisticated buildings as evidence that advanced knowledge and technology actually existed much earlier, perhaps hidden, perhaps intentionally reintroduced by some group.
And as we set out to do in this deep dive, we've explored the source's specific perspective and claims, laying out the details and the connections it uses to build its case against that mainstream narrative.
This source certainly offers a radically different lens to look through, doesn't it? When thinking about a period of history most of us thought we understood.
Definitely a different lens.
And, engaging with viewpoints like this, even the ones that are challenging or, frankly, controversial, it's a powerful way to push our thinking, to really understand the landscape of ideas around a topic. It forces you to look closer at the details, maybe question things you took for granted.
It prompts you to question the speed of progress, doesn't it?
Right.
And the origins of the world we inhabit.
Yeah.
How things came to be the way they are.
Exactly. So if we take the source's argument seriously, just for a moment, this idea that advanced knowledge and technology weren't really invented in that short period, but existed long before, and were somehow revealed or reintroduced, what might that imply? What could that suggest about what other knowledge might be out there, or maybe what else about the past we simply don't know or perhaps aren't being shown?